I'm excited to share with you a United States history story to help you learn English and hopefully answer some of your questions about the cowboys and Indians. Welcome to English Coach 3Ts. I'm Tanya, and one of my students left a comment asking for this topic, so I wanted to share a little with you about what they said. They said, please consider talking a little about the fightings between the Native Americans and New Americans during the West exploration. In most Western movies, they are fighting, killing each other. With no doubt, a few of them had some kind of friendship. I talked a little tiny bit about this in a previous video, and if you'd like to check that out, you can see it at the link above. Today, I want to kind of look at this question, look at this request, and share a little bit about what I know. Also, I have to say that I went back and checked some of my facts. I'm not the kind of person who remembers dates and exact historical facts, although I do love history. So back to what this student said in their comment. Yes, if you've seen any Western movies from the United States, we always have a group of cowboys and a group of Indians, and they're fighting and riding their horses and killing each other, and it's terrible. And while I don't think it's necessarily a very accurate account of what happened, meaning I don't think it is realistic, it does stem from, or we could say it comes from, some of the history that happened. And so I think it would help to go back a little and just get a little of the basic information first. I would love to know as we go along if this is how you learned it or not. Back in the 14th, 15th centuries, we had explorers from Europe coming to the Americas, including Christopher Columbus. And somewhere in that time period, they landed in what is today known as the state of Virginia in the United States. The first colony was in Jamestown in the early 1600s. And not too long after that, what we now call the Pilgrims came and settled in Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts. Now, this was a huge part of what I learned as a child. Plymouth Rock was, in my mind, this huge rock because we talked about it so much. It's a huge part of our history. It's very well known by all Americans, whereas Jamestown, not so much. Yeah, we've heard about it. Yeah, we kind of know where it is and that kind of thing. But the Pilgrims coming to Plymouth Rock, that is what we learned. That is how America started. And I'd like to just say something there too about America. Of course, we have North and South America, and I think there's a whole conversation to be had around why those people who live in the United States in this day are called Americans when we have Americans from the tip of Canada all the way down to the tip of South America. This is another thing that's very curious to me. I'm curious if you're curious about this. If you are a woman with an intermediate to advanced level of English, I would like to invite you to my free class, 3 Secrets to Becoming More Fluent Without Wasting Time and Without Doing Things That Don't Work. In this class, I'm going to give you 3 tips and a bonus that you can start right away to work on your fluency. If you'd like to join us and sign up for free, click on the link in the description and you'll see everything you need there to sign up for free. So, thinking that Plymouth Rock was this huge rock and these pilgrims came, what I remember being taught is the pilgrims were dying because of a lot of disease and cold winters and not knowing how to survive in what at that time was called the New World, where I live now in the United States, was known as the New World, and Europe was known as the Old World. And let me just point out again, that this is just my memory of how I learned history. And some of these facts are things that I looked up and checked into because I'm not a historian, but I want to share with you my experience, kind of along with some of the historical facts. I think the way I remember it is fairly accurate, but what is really accurate when we're talking about something that happened hundreds of years ago? I think this also plays a big part in how we understand those Western movies and what's happening in the United States today as well. I like to think about it as really any relationship now in my life. Anytime you have two people, two groups of people who come together from different backgrounds, there's going to be both things that are harmonious and things that are not. And I think that's a big part of what we're talking about here. So I was talking about the Pilgrims and Plymouth Rock, and here they are in the New World settling down. These particular people who settled in Plymouth, called the Pilgrims, were Puritans by religion, and they did not want to be under the rule of the English church in England. They felt the church was corrupt and needed changes. They wanted to raise their children in what they considered to be a better environment. So they left England. They went to the Netherlands. I had to look that part up. And then they came to what is now the United States on the Mayflower. Again, the Mayflower is iconic, meaning that I would say most people, if not all people in the United States, can remember that the Pilgrims came on the Mayflower. In fact, we still have companies named Mayflower. So here they are in the New World, and the people who were already here, we called Indians for a very long time. Well into my childhood, we called these people Indians, even though they are not from India. A little tiny bit on that story is that the explorers leaving Europe were looking for India because they were looking for resources, spices, things that were in India. And they traveled so far, but they thought they were in India when they actually came to what is now known as the Americas. So they called the people Indians. The people are not Indians. That is why today we call these people Native Americans. And as I understand it, there were hundreds of Native American tribes, all with diverse cultures of their own languages, their own traditions, and they were already living here. Now, that being said, they had huge amounts of land here, and when the settlers came, in my mind, which is similar to saying, in my opinion, there was probably plenty of room for everyone. But when we have a space and two groups of people who want to use that space, I don't think it matters how big or small it is. We're going to have some disagreements. And like was said in the comment from my student, there were probably, I think, almost definitely people who work together peacefully and in harmony. You have heard about Thanksgiving. The first Thanksgiving is historically thought to be in the early 1600s, I think 1621, another thing I had to look up. And it was between the Wampanoag tribes and the Puritans, or what we call the Pilgrims, led by William Bradford. This was a dinner or a feast held to celebrate or to honor each other in working together in the New World, and how the natives had helped the Pilgrims and how the Pilgrims had also helped the natives by bringing resources that they didn't have, things like tools and different ideas and things like this. I think this was probably a wonderful thing, and in my opinion, I think this is a fabulous thing to celebrate and to focus on. Not to say that the negative things didn't happen. I think it's important to look at those things too and put them in the past where they belong. I don't mean that we shouldn't change the way we were acting and act in a more appropriate way, a more positive way. There's so much to be said on that, but I'll leave it at that for now. One of the things I think is huge to understanding this and to understanding our relationships in general is the way we communicate. Even two people who speak the same native language, when they're trying to communicate with each other, as I'm sure most people know, can have huge problems trying to speak in the same language they've known all their lives. These two groups of people had different languages, and I would dare say many different languages. And we as children here in the United States saw many movies, maybe you did too, where they were using hand gestures to tell each other things. Gestures are things we do with our hands to show each other different things. I have another video where I talk about gestures and the importance of understanding gestures in cultures when you're learning a language. And if you want to check that out, you can check the link above for that one. So let's imagine that things are difficult. The natives and the Europeans are starting to have disagreements about how things should be done, where people should live, how we should divide or share things, and they're trying to communicate with different languages and a lot with hand gestures. So it's easy to misunderstand a hand gesture. Like, am I pointing to the plant that you see on the screen? Or am I just pointing to the south because that's the south? Or am I just pointing, you go over there? It would have been really easy to have miscommunication. Now, I'd like to share here that most of my life, if I were to say that I had taken a side in this issue, very early in my life, I felt more like the Native Americans got a raw deal. When we say somebody got a raw deal, we mean a bad deal. And I even had some shame and guilt about being a European American myself. Since I've mentioned European Americans, today, as I said, we don't call the Native Americans Indians, we call them Native Americans. So what do we call somebody like me who was born in the United States and is native to the United States of America? I am what would be called European American. And of course, now we have Asian Americans, Mexican Americans, people from all over the world who are Americans. Personally, I think this is one of the most beautiful parts of our culture and our history, is how we have become this melting pot, or this place where people from all different walks of life, meaning people from all different backgrounds, have come together and created this country. So a lot of the problem at that time had to do with some of the things I've already mentioned. What belongs to who and how are we going to do things? As a child, what I really learned was that a lot of the conflict came from land and who owned the land or didn't own the land. Europeans came from a culture where people own a specific piece of land, and it's usually very well defined. The Native Americans came from a culture where the land was more communal, meaning that we shared the land as a community, and we can't say this is mine, this is yours. Again, as a child, I thought that that really was something that made a lot of sense to me. What if we could work together? As an adult, I also see, yes, that is a fabulous idea, and sometimes some boundaries are a good thing in relationships of almost any kind. I would again say probably all kinds. Boundaries that have to do with land, boundaries that have to do with how we treat each other. And this was difficult to define at that time. So as time went by, again, I'm sure there were some people who were working it out and others who were not. We see this today in our cultures, in our countries today. I think we have always had this kind of thing happening. Unfortunately, what happened in this situation, similar to what happens in a lot of situations, is that this conflict began to rise and get worse and ended up in the death of many people, in a lot of loss. So here we were in a difficult time when disease and hunger and weather and extremes were already difficult, but then our inability to get along made it worse. I can really relate to this in my personal life. When things are more stressful, I tend to have more difficulty expressing myself appropriately, communicating appropriately, and I've found that I've really had to focus time on learning how to communicate in stressful times. And in those times, this wasn't something. Let me just stop there for a second and say, I didn't live in those times. But what I know about those times is that there wasn't a lot of time to do anything but survive. Grow food, harvest food, prepare the food, make the food, hunt for food, protect your family, try to figure out how to survive the winter, those kinds of things. And I know just from my life, 57 years so far, a lot has changed. And in just those 57 years, we have gotten much better at looking at how we communicate and how we take care of our needs that are not just physical needs. So one of the things that I think is one of the most sad things in our history is that at some point, the European Americans made decisions to relocate. This is the nice way to say, to force people off their land. They forced the Native Americans to move from what was already their land to new land. Like, oh, okay, we're going to give you this new land. But the truth is, you're giving us this land, but you're taking our land. I just want to read a little from the student who left the comment that I read earlier. At the end, it says, I know this is a difficult topic and this is confusing me a lot. This is a very difficult topic, and I will say it is extremely hard for Americans living today to discuss it with each other. There's almost always conflict still, differences of opinions. What really happened, those kinds of things are unclear. What we do know is that a lot of the Native Americans, like I said, were moved, and what is historically now known as the Trail of Tears. The Cherokee were one of the tribes that were moved, and the reason it is called, or one of the reasons it is called the Trail of Tears, is that many of the people who were moved, many of the natives who were moved, died on the trail, suffered on the trail, had great loss. I remember learning about this as a child and being heartbroken, sick to hear about this. As you know, there are other parts of American history that are very sad, and this is one that I still haven't reconciled with in my mind. Today, there are people who say we need to have reconciliation for the natives who had such great loss. Today in the United States, we have what we call reservations. These are huge pieces of land where different tribes live. I believe, if I'm correct, I didn't check into this to be positive, but I know that they operate under different rules than the neighboring areas of the United States. I have been to a few different reservations. I really enjoy learning history now, and the more I visit these places, talk about it, and even talking about it today, the more I learn. There is so much I could tell you about this and other parts of our history. I think that this is a good place to let the story be for right now and hopefully continue at another time. If you're interested in that, let me know in the comments below. And I would just like to say that one of the reasons I started making story videos is that listening to stories, to things that you understand, is greatly going to help you to improve your fluency. And stories like this are especially important to learning a language because it helps you to understand the culture and the people who speak that language. I'd also like to just say that if I've made any mistakes in my historical accounts, I apologize for that absolutely, and I would love to know what you know that might be different than what I know. And I'd also love to know what your thoughts about this are. Most of what I've shared with you today, maybe not most, but more than half of what I've shared with you today is my experience of learning this history and what I remember. And I think that this is really huge in the way that our world develops. I would absolutely love to know any stories about your history that you were reminded of while listening to the history of this country. If you're interested in listening to other stories so that you can become more fluent, I invite you to check out this video next, and I'll see you there. Bye.